Hi, everyone. Welcome to our not so midweek Montessori live stream today. We are switching it up and having a Friday afternoon chat today for convenience and so that we can reach more people at more convenient times for them, especially our guest today, who is Andrew Faulstich, who is an adolescent guide and many, many other things. So if you have been on the conference, Montessori conference train this season, you probably have seen Andrew present or have at least seen him in and out of conferences. He's been everywhere, right? That AIM has been at least. So it's been a good season. And we're so happy to have you with us today and to address an area that AIM doesn't do a lot with. We don't have a lot of resources for adolescents, but I do think it's an area that we need to talk about. It's an important aspect of Montessori education, one that I'm particularly interested in as I have an 11 and 12-year-old. So I'm especially excited to talk to you today. And before we get started on some digging deep into some conversations about adolescence and about sort of how to approach it in the Montessori lens, I want to give Andrew a chance to introduce himself. And I always ask people to tell me a little bit about their Montessori journey, but I've been listening to Andrew's podcast and he phrases it in such a way that I was inspired to ask today. He always asks people what their Montessori origin story is. And I like it because it sounds very heroic and I think that's appropriate. So Andrew, tell us your Montessori origin story and where it led you and what you're up to these days.
Well, thanks, Carolyn, for inviting me to be here. I'm so excited to be live with you all. My origin story starts at age 4. So I was lucky to be a Montessori child, and I was in my Montessori school. Shout out to Pioneer Valley Montessori School in Western Massachusetts, all the way through upper elementary. And that experience as a Montessori student fundamentally changed the way that I saw myself, saw my place in the world, saw learning as a part of my life. And from my Montessori school, there were no adolescent programs in the area at the time. So I went to a traditional private New England prep school. And I was the only student that didn't raise my hand and say, is this going to be on the test? I continued to have a real drive and thirst for learning. But the truth of the matter is, once I left Montessori, outside of being the commencement speaker for the 6th grade graduation twice as an alumni, I didn't really think much about Montessori. I went through high school. I knew that education and working globally was important to me. I went through college. I got my master's in anthropology. And then I went to grad school studying international educational development. And I had been teaching for a number of years at that point, and I'd been using broadly learner-centered methodologies, but hadn't come back to Montessori and certainly hadn't approached Montessori adolescents. But I had this turning point when I was in grad school in January 2020, a time that would soon be pivotal for us all. I was in India as part of a research trip with my program, and we were studying something other than education, but my professor knew that education was of interest to me. And so we spent the afternoon at a Montessori school that was for orphan children. And here was a school that had no budget, no space, lack of staff, all of the things that would make running a program really difficult. And they had the most thoughtful, caring adolescents who, by the way, ran their entire school, toddler through 12. All students lived on campus. All students built an interdependent community where their needs were met, where they were thriving. And I remember walking around the halls of this Montessori school and thinking, if this can work here, if this method can be so powerful, and of course I remembered how powerful it was from my own experience, then there's got to be something to this. And so I knew I needed to get back into the work. And so from there, I did some research and work in grad school as it related to Montessori. And then as soon as I was done with grad school, dove right in. I've worked in 3 different adolescent programs. I started one, I restarted another. Now I work at the Montessori high school level with 15 to 18 students. And, I was just telling Carolyn before we log on, the Montessori Adolescent program is just so transformative because it unlocks all of the adolescent potential. And oftentimes in our society, we judge adolescents or we prejudge them, and we don't give them the kinds of spaces and opportunities that would allow them to thrive. And we assume that they're devious. We assume that they're trying to get away with things, that they're not engaged in their work. But when we provide a developmentally appropriate environment, everything changes. And not only what they're capable of, but who they become is really amazing to see. So I'm grateful to continue to work with adolescents now at the Oneness-Family Montessori School and to share a little bit about what that's like and my knowledge of adolescent development here today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I love that story. I love that that trip was so influential to you and that was really a turning point. So that's such a wonderful way to like change your perspective and change your worldview by actually experiencing something firsthand and then bringing it back and doing the work you're doing, like the very important work you're doing by presenting and by hosting a podcast and by just being out there and publishing. And you've written a book, like you've done all of these really pivotal things to bring Montessori education to the forefront. And it's really appreciated. It's lovely to see people in this, like, you know, your younger generation coming through and coming up and really contributing to the conversation. So it's lovely. Thank you for all of what you do.
Well, thank you. I'm just glad to do it. And, you know, and because of that work, I've been in touch with you, Carolyn, with folks at AIM, and really the Montessori community is so caring, and I am where I am because I've had mentors and other folks around me that have supported me, and I really find ways to try to give back in meaningful ways.
Well, and it is a very supportive, caring community, and connections are so easy to make because I think everyone has the same heart and the same vision, and they want to discuss it and they want to, you know, embrace everyone's ideas, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So today we are going to talk a little bit about adolescence and some of the things that apply not just to, I mean, to everyone who's dealing with adolescence, right? Like there's a lot of folks dealing with the adolescent population, whether they're teachers or coaches or parents or just grandparents. I mean, anyone really dealing with an adolescent has probably seen some of the things that we're going to talk about today and has some thoughts about the transition that happens between elementary age children and that I don't know what we're going to call it, a bridge, the transition to adolescence. So what is happening during this time? Like there's a lot going on in their brain development and their physical development and their emotional development, but like what can we expect to see as parents who are living this experience? What kind of changes do you see from elementary to adolescence?
Well, it's a great question, Carolyn. And, you know, adolescence is this period of a state of transition. And because of that, Montessori called it a state of expectation. So when our young people emerge into early adolescence, they know definitively that they are not children anymore. And they will tell you that. If you're a parent of an adolescent or you interact with them, they've probably told you that. But they're also not yet adults, and they don't know the place that they'll take in the adult world. And so this period of adolescence is that moment for them to experiment and to figure out how they want to be in the world as adults. What are the kinds of things they want to do? What are the kinds of ways that they might want to act? And so, you know, one of the things that I often do when I'm working with parents, and I even talk about this with adolescents, is I draw a Venn diagram on the whiteboard. And I have child on one side and adult on the other, and I draw a little figure in the middle, and I say, this is you. You are right here. And that means that they're going through what Montessori called a social and a physical rebirth. And so the physical rebirth is easy. They're going through puberty. And that means that one day they wake up and their arms are longer than they were the day before. And their voice is deeper than it was the day before. And all of these things about them are changing. And that's why adolescents bump into things and trip over things, just like our toddlers are getting used to working in their bodies and going through that functional independence. Our adolescents are going through that as well. But then there's, of course, the social rebirth, and that's not quite as easy to see. But the child personality that your young person once had is gone because they're trying to create a new identity in the context of the adult world. They're trying to ask three questions. Who am I? What am I good at? And what am I good for? And so their relationship with everybody else must change. And of course, that also means their relationship with parents and caregivers must change. And this is something that is very hard for parents because, and now I'll say that I'm not a parent, but I've worked with a number of parents over the years. Of course, I've studied this work for a long time. You feel like you've gotten to know this young person for 12 years of their life, and all of a sudden you don't know them anymore, and you have to do this work again. But that's because they're changing. They're a different person. And so because they're going to be different, the nature of your relationship has to be different, And so it's okay for your adolescent to start pulling away, not because they don't like you, not because you did something wrong, but because they're looking for other people, other adults, other young people in their sphere who they can look up to, who they can begin to solidify their identity with, because they're looking for that place outside of the family in society. And that's really what we want to help them do, is find ways to do meaningful adult-like work that allow them to determine, how do I want to be as an adult? What are the options that are available to me? What's important to me about my morals, my ethics, my values? So developing a strong sense of social justice, of morality, and all of that can be supported by parents and families and, of course, guides. And we have to make sure that we recognize that they're different people and they might be different day to day, and to honor that and to help listen to them, and to realize that a lot of what they're going through, and this is the key part, they don't always have the language to describe what it is. And so they're feeling things for the first time. They're experiencing this for the first time. They don't always have the capacity to articulate what that is. And so having patience, being there and being in the conversation with them really goes a long way, because just like you're navigating this for the first time, they're navigating it for the first time too.
So it's grace and courtesy, right? And holding back when it feels very frustrating, to, give your child grace and give yourself grace as you navigate this, very tumultuous time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and how would you say, how do you foster those relationships? And I think it's lovely to have a Montessori guide, right? That in any school that has a teacher who stays with the students for more than 1 year, I think is a really beneficial thing, because even if you're not a parent, you've been with these students for multiple years. You've seen them grow and change. You're seeing who they are becoming, and you're supporting them in this journey. So you've got those resources, right? You've got the teachers and the trusted folks that you have in those arenas. But how else can you foster good relationships outside of those to really give your adolescents an outlet to figure this stuff out? And if they need to do it away from you a little bit, how do we facilitate that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and part of it is really knowing how to listen and observe for their needs. And so oftentimes there's something that parents and guides might do that's very well-meaning, which is to say, well, when I was an adolescent, I needed this or I needed that, and therefore that is the same thing I'm going to provide for my young person. And the reality is every adolescent is different. And of course, they'll tell you that, and they feel like they're very different. But it's easy to put our own ideas of what we might have wanted or what might have served us onto other young people. And I find that this is particularly hard at the age of adolescence, because that's where we formed our sense of selves. That's where we turned ourselves into the adults that we are now. And so sometimes it might be hard to hold two things at once, that this thing that happened to me when I was an adolescent may have been important in my own development, but it might not be the best thing for the adolescent that I have in front of me. And that's okay. And we have to be okay with that. But as much as we can connect and invite them to take on adult-like work, that's where Montessori talked about the valorization of the personality. And that is so critically important for adolescents. So I'll give you an example. And I just wrote about this in Tomorrow's Child. So years ago, so I started my work in a Montessori high school. I'm back in one now. But in that first one, I was working with this older adolescent, and she had a variety of learning differences. And that meant that she was in a different place academically than some of her peers. That led her to feel a lot of discouragement, a lot of anxiety around being in our space, in seminar and those kinds of activities. She was sort of hesitant to engage with others because of that, particularly as it related to language. But then she turned 16 and she was able to get a job, and her parents helped her get a job as a lifeguard at the local swimming pool. And that opportunity changed everything for her, because she was in a role where she contributed to the good of that organization, and she was valorized for that work. She was recognized for it. And Montessori talks about those kinds of experiences where young people can contribute in an adult-like way meaningfully and then get recognized for that work, that's what helps them build a sense of confidence. That's what helps them build a sense of positive identity. And even though all of that was happening outside of school, those kinds of experiences changed her entire affect and demeanor when working with us in school. She was more likely to engage. She was more likely to take risks. She was more likely to collaborate with others because she knew that she as a person was valuable. And adolescents need to have that experience of putting themselves out there, trying something, and getting that positive feedback. It's why here in adolescent programs, we have a microeconomy or production and exchange program where students are making things and selling them in, somewhere out in public. It's not so they can make ridiculous amounts of money. It's so they can have the experience of working on something, building it, offering it to the world, and then having that be recognized. But those kinds of things can happen even in the household. We don't want our adolescents to do chores like they would have when they were 8 or 10, but there may be meaningful things that they can do to contribute to the well-being of the household. And ideally, they should contribute to the well-being of the household. And you can help connect them to those things, again, always with an invitation. We always want them to be stepping into it. Or we might say you have 2 or 3 options to choose from. If, we're a household and these are things that need to get done, someone needs to do them. What would you like to do? If we can connect them with that adult-like work, that's what helps them build that sense of self. And it also helps them be in meaningful relationship with others, particularly with parents, because parents then are, able to build that relationship in a new way of, oh, I noticed that you did this thing that was really helpful. So those are just some ideas.
I love those ideas. I think it's great. And I think, it relates so much to how we as adults are never done learning and growing, and to take a look at ourselves and to that self-reflection and self-observation and like, what am I doing and what makes me feel good and confident and appreciated, and to try to find things that will do the same thing for your young people is that's a lovely way to look at it. I think that's great. So yeah, those are great answers. What else? I mean, we have this, you talked about it briefly already, but like we have this cultural image of the teenager as moody and deviant and, almost like, oh, teenagers, they're just, we write them off. We don't give them a lot of credit or respect. And how can we sort of change that perspective? Because I do see it still. I mean, my kids they were in Montessori from infant through elementary, and now they're in a prep school. And you see it in traditional environments where like there's a lot of control exerted over adolescents to try to rein them in. And how do we combat that? And like, why is that the wrong thing to do? Why is that a bad choice?
Well, I really do think that adolescents are the most misunderstood age group, and they get a bad rap, not because they're any more difficult or less difficult than any other age, but simply because we don't often prepare environments based on their needs. So we've known since Montessori's time, and now it's been backed up with modern day research, that adolescents need independence and autonomy. They need to be able to take risks, and they need to be able to work together with their peers. But what do traditional middle and high schools do? They say less autonomy, less independence. We don't trust you. Do your own work. You can't work with your peers. And so what happens then is if we deprive the environment of what our young people need, they're not going to develop in the most positive ways. They're going to do things that we might not want them to do. They're going to say, why would I follow this system? Why would I do this homework? Why would I take that exam? And then because we see those behaviors that we don't like, we clamp down on them more. We say, well, you couldn't do this the first time, so now I'm going to give you less independence, less autonomy, less work with other people. And this vicious cycle continues. And I don't think, at least in the United States context, we've ever really given adolescents the spaces that they need. And, to be clear, no adolescent program is perfect. There's always things that we can do and improve. And just by making simple shifts, even in the way we relate to young people and the way that we we see them and appreciate them as, whole human beings. Montessori has this great quote. She says, you should never treat the adolescent as though they are a child. That's a phase they have passed. It's better to see them and treat them as if they had greater value and maturity than they currently have. You have to see them for what they could be, not for where they are in that moment. Just that shift alone brings out what my mentor Pat Luda calls these noble characteristics, where adolescents are kind, where they're funny, where they care about others, where they care about the world. They want to make a difference. They want to do meaningful work. So it's not that that's not possible or that it's difficult. It's that we do the wrong thing. And as adults, oftentimes, and there's this great quote by a friend of mine, Tom Brown, he's a Montessorian in the UK. His quote is, we control in young people what we are afraid of in ourselves as adults. And when we tell teenagers that they can't be trusted, it's probably because we were told as teenagers that we couldn't be trusted. But the key phrase that I like to use is the only prerequisite for freedom and independence is freedom and independence. So if you have young people always in a setting of compliance and control that's not designed for their developmental needs, they'll never be prepared to step into the next step because they need that new environment. They need to grapple with that freedom. They need to make mistakes. They need to fail over and over and over again and have guides that are willing to be in the conversation with them about what that's like. Because the outcomes of that, of an adolescent program that centers their needs, that gives them that time and space to try new things, to work with others, to spend time just sitting and thinking about things and not having to go on to the next task like a worker bee, that not only has really great academic outcomes, which is not the point, but it's a result, really produces young people who are confident, who are caring, who are kind. And having worked in both Montessori and more traditional and also learner-centered environments, there's a stark difference in the environment you create impacts the way that young people act. And so it's not their fault that we as adults haven't gotten our work together to prepare environments that are made for adolescents' needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can do that at home too. I mean, I think at home you can prepare an environment that allows your child to flourish. And when you give them the respect that they deserve as a whole human being, they'll reciprocate that respect, right? The respect is mutual, and that's how it grows, and that's how they learn how to treat others, right? So I think that that's important and difficult, right? Like, I think that's the thing I've heard so many times from our parenting team who usually work with infants and toddlers, but Amanda and Lucy are fantastic. And they're always talking about how we're all imperfect. And as parenting, like, nobody's a perfect parent, right? Like, and nobody's a perfect human, and we all make mistakes, but it's okay to make mistakes because sometimes mistakes are the best way to learn how to move forward. And especially at the adolescent age, as a parent, I think it's okay to admit your mistakes to your children, to say, like, I shouldn't have said that. Like, that wasn't a good choice. Like, I would handle it differently if I could go back, and show them that it's okay to admit mistakes. Because I think that was one of the hardest things I ever learned in life. Was it was so, like, you make a mistake and you feel like this clench in your heart that, like, you've done something horrible. It's really hard to say, I did something wrong, I made a mistake, there's a consequence because of it. And so if you teach them young enough that it's okay to do that and that people will support you and help you through it, that's a very valuable lesson. So.
Yeah. And, it's especially important at adolescence. And this is something that my mentor, Pat, shared with me really early on, that having humility and really owning our mistakes with adolescence, or the things that didn't go the way we'd planned, honestly, that is what builds relationships. That's where that respect comes from, because adolescents are looking to us in a new way. So when they were in the elementary age, we were their heroes. We could do everything. We had all the answers. And it felt kind of good to be that way. But then when they become adolescents, they think, well, that could be me. So is that adult, that parent, teacher, guardian, coach, whoever, are they really doing what they say they're doing? They say they believe and think these things. Are they acting that way? And we might often see younger adolescents in particular, and this is what Montessori practitioners have observed in the last 40 years, is that they are much more they're much more critical of adults who are hypocritical, who say one thing and do another. And we're all going to do that sometimes. And the amount of conversations I've had to have with students of, hey, I wish that I hadn't done that thing that way, or even, hey, that lesson really didn't go how I expected, and let's talk about it. That what our fear is, going back to our fear as adults, because it is nerve-wracking, especially with the power imbalance, to say, well, I made a mistake. Our fear is that they'll jump on us. They'll say, of course you're wrong. We're never going to listen to you again. It's over. You've lost my respect. But in fact, the opposite happens when we honestly say, hey, that wasn't how we intended. Let's talk about what that was like. Let's figure out what to do next. That builds respect and rapport. That makes young people say, this person isn't perfect. And of course, no one is, but that's how I want to walk through the world. And so that to me is one of the hardest things, both for guides and for parents, to honestly be able to say, I'm sorry that I reacted that way. When you yelled at me when you walked out of the car, that made me really frustrated. And so this is how I reacted, and I'm sorry about that. And then we can model to them what it's like to have emotions and feelings, and share that with them, that they're not the only ones who are having feelings. We're having feelings as adults, as parents, as caregivers, and they need to know that too. And they need to know that their actions have an impact on others. And that's not to put ours over theirs or theirs over ours, but to recognize that, again, if we're forming a new relationship, if we're getting to know this human being, this adolescent, for the first time in this new form as they're creating themselves, that means that we have to be in dialogue about how we feel about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so important to be able to communicate those feelings that you're having openly to your kids, so that they can understand that that's okay too, right? Because that's been a societal norm to like not share your feelings and not, and we really need to move past that. So before we finish up, because I don't want to take too much of your time on this Friday evening, I'm sure you have some good things to go do, but I do want to end on a positive note. And I want to share that, a friend of mine who is a Montessori head of school, we were on the phone the other day, and she was like, how are your kids? And before I even thought about it, I was like, they're so much fun now. I was like, it's so lovely to be able to talk to them and binge watch TV shows with them and travel with them and do these things with them that used to be a little bit more difficult when they were kids and you were caring for them. And now they're little friends, right? But we can have such a great time together, and you're still of course parenting, but seeing them become the people who they're becoming is beautiful and joyous and really fun. So I think that's something to always remember. And I'm sure as guides you do this too, but as you're going through this experience as a parent and you're feeling frustrated, because you will at times feel frustrated, that there's so much joy to be had in it. And that these are people that you've helped shape and that you can continue to help shape. And it's a good thing. So any good stories, good thoughts to end this on about this experience of working with this age group?
Well, yeah, I so appreciate, Carolyn, you bringing us back to joy, because there is so much of that when working with adolescents. And people say, back to this cultural image, when I tell them I work with middle and high school students, they go, oh my gosh, bless you, that's so terrible. But one of the things that adolescents remind me is not to take myself or life too seriously, in particular, because the things that would frustrate other adults that adolescents do, I just can't help but laugh. And then we all kind of laugh about it together, and then we move on, and it's okay. And I'm not the adult who is going to get up and yell and get angry. I'm like, oh, that was actually kind of funny. And we can carry on. And it connects me with that inner sense of, sometimes we have this sense of, I'm on this live stream and I'm a Montessori practitioner and I'm serious, but that's not what brings life joy. And adolescents are so full of that, and they connect me with it every day. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, and that's not what brings anybody joy, right? Anybody who's drawn to this work and drawn to work with children, I think has to have that inner joy and that love of the work, right? So even when it's hard and you have to be serious and you're serious about what you're doing, you still have that joy inherently too. So it's a good thing to have. And I was laughing because I was thinking about an experience I had the other day where my kids, something happened that was inappropriate, but I could not stop laughing about it with them. I was like, that was, and they were like, but mom, you're laughing. And I was like, yep, but we're just going to move past it. Because it is okay. It's okay to be silly and to be, to realize that not everything is so serious. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much. You've made me feel better. I'm on a trip with my family now for work, but they're not here right this second, but it's been a hard day in the car, and I was, I'm feeling rejuvenated to go and chat with my children and have a good evening with them. So I hope that that's done the same for some of you who are viewing this. And please know that there's always a community of folks at AIM and Andrew and all kinds of people who you can ask questions to. If you're watching this after the fact, if you're live, after the live stream, you can post a question. I'll get it to Andrew. It takes a village, and in the Montessori community, we provide that. So we're always happy to help and give guidance and just listen too. So please comment, share this with other parents who might want more information. And our upcoming summit, our summit starts on Tuesday. Andrew is presenting. So if you're a guide and you want more adolescent knowledge, he's presenting on the 5-pair. Okay, so tell me the title again, because I've got so many summit presentations, they're rolling in my head. But
yes, it's dismantling the 5-paragraph essay, and it's a totally new vision for how we can think about language in our adolescent prepared environments to support psychic formation and identity development. So I'm really excited to have folks see it and would love to hear feedback. I don't have all the answers, but I love being in conversation. So would love to hear folks' thoughts if they go and check it out.
Yeah, so please do. It's a great presentation. I've listened to it, and I got a lot out of it, even not being a guide. So I think that it is valuable, and I hope that you'll join us for the summit. It's free. There's a ton of presentations, 34 to be exact, that you can check out. And Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your time with me on this Friday afternoon. I really appreciate it. I know that we'll see each other again, and thank you for all that you've given to AIM just this past month by contributing a presentation and by joining me today, and your conversation with Suzanne as well. So we appreciate you and what you're doing, and I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thanks, you too, Carolyn. I really appreciate being on here, and AIM's doing great work, so I'm happy to be a part of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll be in touch, and everyone, please comment, ask questions. Check out Andrew's podcast. I will put a link in the comments. It's a great podcast. It talks about all aspects of Montessori education, and I think that you will enjoy it, whether you're a parent or a guide or just someone who cares about children. So check that out. I'll post that link, and everybody have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy your time with your family, with your adolescents, and thank you again, Andrew.
Thank you.